Here's our PCOS part 2 as promised. Now, in my previous video, I talked a lot about what's going on in the body with PCOS and why there has been some of this, frankly, misinformation about what people are told and what they need to do with food. So if you didn't watch that video, go check that one out because that is a good kind of lead up to what I'm going to talk about today, which is, of course, what you should do when you have PCOS. Now, as I was mentioning in the very last part of the video before, is that there is a higher risk of eating disorders with individuals with PCOS, specifically binge eating disorder. And what they find is that a lot of individuals with PCOS struggle with binge eating, which is why many of them can be in a higher weight body because of this history of binge eating. So everything that I'm about to talk about today in terms of recommendations with their food, it's because we also have to think about how if you're already at risk for binge eating, we really need to fuel your body well to prevent those binges from happening. So what have we heard about PCOS as it relates to food, right? We've heard that you have to do really low calories, that you have to eat no carbs and sugar, and that usually you have to do like low glycemic index or paleo or whatever, fill in the blank, right? I'm here to tell you that none of those are true. So you should eat enough calories to fuel your body. If you have PCOS, you do not need to be eating 800 or 1,000 or even 1,200 calories. That's too low for you. Now, as I mentioned in the previous video, when you have PCOS, your body's constantly in this oxidative state, which leads to a state of inflammation because that's how the body responds to oxidation, right? It's all because of this hormone imbalance, and essentially PCOS is a disease of imbalance, right? And so all of that happens, and your body's constantly in this state of inflammation, leading you to be tired. So then when you restrict your calories, you're putting yourself in a worse state. There's a lot of research to show that when you do a restrictive diet or when you're dieting, your body actually ends up being more inflamed. So you're just making that worse. So don't restrict your calories. We need to fuel you enough. Now, it's also important that we fuel you enough to prevent cravings and binges. So what can be really good to do is actually eat every 3 or 4 hours. You probably have heard that for the general population, and that's true. Now, what you want to do for eating every 3 to 4 hours is try to have a protein source pretty much every time that you eat. If anybody is dealing with some insulin resistance or some of the other things that can come with PCOS, having protein every time that you eat will, one, help regulate those blood sugar levels and insulin levels, but also will help you to eat more intuitively so that you don't binge and have all of these cravings for carbs and sweets from restriction. Now, one of the things that can be experimented with is actually having a little bit of protein first thing in the morning and right before going to bed. Maybe 10 to 20 grams of protein. To put that in perspective, 2 tablespoons of peanut butter usually has about 8 grams of protein. So have a little bit of protein, and the reason you want to do that is that can help with this insulin resistance and really help, again, to manage cravings and regulation and keep your body in a lower state of inflammation throughout the day and the evening. So protein every time that you eat every 3 to 4 hours. Now, let's talk about carbs and fat. First, let's talk a little bit about fat because carbs is the hot topic, so I'm going to string you along on that one. But you should not keep fat low. Doing low fat actually makes, again, we'll go back to that oxidative inflammation state, worse. So omega-3s, which come from nuts and seeds and salmon and tuna and canola oil and olive oil, omega-3s are known to help decrease inflammation and help your body heal. If you're doing low fat, inevitably, you're not going to get enough omega-3s to help with that oxidative and inflammatory state. So don't do low fat. If anything, similar to the protein, you should have a little bit of fat every time that you eat and try to space things out throughout the day to keep consistency. Now, as I mentioned with the omega-3s, it is good to have a diet high in omega-3s. So all of those foods, like I said, salmon, tuna, canola oil, olive oil, nuts, etc., incorporate those into your day. In some cases, you may need to supplement. I would definitely recommend asking your doctor about that, but that will help decrease this oxidative inflammatory state and make it more likely for your body to be able to let go of fat instead of constantly being wound up in this like constant state of trying to protect you via inflammation. So don't eat low fat. Similar to the protein, we need to space that out throughout the day. finally, at long last, let's talk about carbs. So, yes, so many people are told that they should do low carb or low glycemic index or whatever it might be with PCOS, but that's not true. I think the reason that they're told that, and based on all the research that's out there, is because there tends to be short-term success with that. And what I mean by short-term success is maybe a couple of months, maybe a year, but inevitably things fall off. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So when people cut out carbs and sugar, a lot of times people will say like, oh, I feel so much better. I have so much more energy. I have less brain fog, which is fine. That's great. But inevitably that only lasts for a little while. And then maybe what perpetuates this idea that they need to keep carbs and sugar and all that stuff lower is maybe weight on the scale did come down, right? But again, it's short term. In all of the research done, there's only short-term studies. And part of the reason, and in some of the research that I've read actually, lots of people start to fall off of these studies when it's restricting carbs and sugar because it's not sustainable. And as you know, regardless of when we're talking about PCOS or not, you know that what we talk about a lot here is that things have to be sustainable. You have to be able to do things consistently, and it needs to be something that you can commit to forever. There's no point in doing something for 3 months, dropping a bunch of weight, and then gaining it all back. That's just gonna set us up for a worse state down the road. So, there's no good evidence out there to show that you should have to do low carb. However, what you can do is focus on higher fiber carbs, more natural carbohydrates, and avoiding the highly processed carbs. And remember, when I say highly processed, we're talking about like Cheez-Its and I don't know, some of the pretzels that are out there and some of that like stuff that has a really, really long shelf life. So if you can focus on carbs that have more fiber in them, maybe things like oatmeal or whole grain breads or brown rice, that will help. Now, kind of lumping everything that I said together. You do not need to eat super low calories. You should be eating fats. If anything, you need to focus on omega-3s and make sure you're getting enough fat. You need to have plenty of protein. It can be good to experiment with having a little bit of protein first thing in the morning and at the very end of the day, but really try to have protein almost every time that you eat. And you do need to eat carbs. It's good to do higher fiber carbs and less processed carbs, but you need to fuel your body consistently. Back to what I was saying about binge eating, what's really important is making sure that your body is fueled, that we're keeping things consistent, we're trying to decrease this inflammatory state, which you can do so through food by fueling your body well. And we need to make sure that you're fueled enough so that you're not leading yourself into this binge eating behavior or even a pattern of binging and restricting. So, you heard it here. Do not restrict your calories, do not restrict your carbs. There's lots of different ways you can balance your carbs and fat and protein throughout the day, but you need all of those nutrients even when you have PCOS. Guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. We're really glad that you're here. Please leave us any questions or comments in the comments.